Lexington, South Carolina Police Department announced that at 2:48 p.m. this afternoon, the body of a woman wearing clothing that fit the description of Moore was found in the area of North Lake Drive and Old Cherokee Road near where she was last seen.
6 days. That's how long Elena Moore's body lay hidden in a stretch of woods barely half a mile from a Publix parking lot in a neighborhood with sidewalks, streetlights, and neighbors who knew her name. Search teams walked past that ground more than once. Drones flew overhead. And still, nothing until a single phone call from a stranger changed everything. She vanished wearing the same olive green hoodie she was found in. No car, no confirmed phone signal. Just a woman walking alone into the dark in a town where everybody seemed to know her, and not one person can explain why she never came back. Before we go any further, this case involves a missing woman, a body discovered in the woods, and details about mental health crisis that some viewers may find disturbing. Please take care of yourself while watching. If this is your first time here, welcome to True Crime Exposed. Hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. And if this case grips you the way it's gripped us, share it, because cases like this only get solved when enough people are paying attention. Now let's go back to the beginning and walk through exactly how Elena Katherine Moore disappeared. Elena Katherine Moore was 39 years old, and by every account from the people who knew her, she did not live a small life. She lived in Lexington, South Carolina, a town of roughly 23,000 people sitting just west of Columbia, the kind of place where faces are familiar and routines are public. Elena's routine touched a lot of those faces. She worked as a personal trainer at Wolf's Fitness Center, building a client base built on consistency and trust. She also worked a job at a CVS pharmacy, and on top of that, she bartended at more than one bar in the Lexington area. 3 jobs, 3 separate circles of people, all of whom saw her regularly enough to notice if something changed. Wolf's Fitness Center later confirmed to Newsweek that they had given investigators everything they had and would continue assisting however they could. That's not a small detail. It means the people who worked alongside her, day in and day out, were treated as relevant to this case from the very beginning. Her personal life had just as much history behind it. Elena and her husband had been together for more than 13 years before they made it official in 2024. Multiple outlets reporting on the case have listed his name as Brannon Slice, though spelling has varied slightly across early reports, an issue that often happens in the first days of a fast-moving case. What's consistent is the timeline. 13 years as a couple, less than 2 years as a married one. Friends who spoke to reporters described a woman who didn't disappear into her relationship or her work. Lauren Beasley, a friend who spoke with Fox News Digital, said she'd last talked to Elena about a month before she vanished, and at the time, everything about her seemed ordinary. No complaints, no warning signs in conversation, nothing that stood out, just a woman living her life. There's one more fact worth stating plainly, because it later mattered to several people trying to reach Elena's family for comment. Elena was adopted. Her adoptive family was contacted by members of the press after she went missing. As of this reporting, they had not responded publicly. That's it. No more is confirmed beyond that, and no more should be assumed. Now here's where the timeline starts to matter. On May 31st, several weeks before she disappeared, Elena went to brunch with a group of friends. One of them, Sandra Campbell, later told TMZ that Elena's behavior that day was off. She kept getting up from the table, she kept looking out the window, almost like she was watching for someone. Campbell said she didn't bring it up in front of the other women at the table because she wasn't especially close with them. But at the end of the brunch, as they hugged goodbye, Elena reportedly told her privately that she was scared for her life. She didn't explain why. She said she'd fill Campbell in later. That conversation never happened. On June 4th, Elena called Sandra Campbell. Campbell missed the call. The two never spoke again. 1 week after that missed call, on Thursday, the 11th of June 2026, at approximately 6:40 inches the evening, Elena Katherine Moore signed into the Planet Fitness located at 560 Whiteford Way in Lexington. This wasn't unusual. It was part of her routine, the same gym, the same kind of evening she'd had countless times before. What happened after that was different. Police have confirmed Elena did not own a vehicle, so when she left the gym, she left on foot. And instead of walking toward home, surveillance placed her walking away from the building toward a wooded area behind a nearby Lowe's home improvement store. That's the last anyone saw of the Elena Moore, her friends and coworkers knew, heading into the trees on a Thursday evening, on foot, alone. If you're noticing how many documented warning signs existed before that night, you're not wrong, and we've only covered the beginning. Subscribe now, because the investigation into what happened next, told only through confirmed reporting, is coming up next. The same June 4th that ended with a missed phone call also produced something else, something that wouldn't surface publicly until after Elena disappeared. A half-mile from the Planet Fitness on Whiteford Way, a couple named Sarah Burleson and John Moore, no relation to Elena, had a Ring doorbell camera mounted at their front door. That evening, the camera recorded something neither of them expected to see again under very different circumstances just days later. A DoorDash driver arrived at their home and dropped off a food order. Elena Moore walked up to the door and picked up the order as though it belonged to her. John Moore opened the door, took the food from her, and turned to head back inside. That's when Elena started walking into the house with him, as if she lived there. John Moore later described that moment to News Nation in his own words. He said that once he took the food from her and turned to walk back into the house, she started to walk in with him, and she seemed confused and disoriented about where she was or what she was doing. Sarah Burleson spoke to Elena directly that day as well. According to Burleson, Elena said she didn't know what she was doing, not lost in the sense of not knowing which street she was on, lost in a different, more troubling way. That footage sat with the Burleson and Moore household for a week before it became relevant to a missing persons case. And it wasn't the only piece of documented concern from that period. Before Elena disappeared, her husband left a comment on a Facebook post describing her as not well, 2 words. The post containing that comment was later deleted. That is a confirmed, documented fact. What it means is a separate question, and one we're not going to answer for you, because nobody, including investigators, has answered it definitively either. Around the same time, News Nation reported, citing a source connected to the investigation, that Elena had recently been released from a mental health facility before she vanished. That same source also told News Nation that she'd been having relationship difficulties with her husband. Neither claim has been officially confirmed by Lexington police. Both are still circulating as reported, sourced information, not confirmed fact, and we want to be precise about that distinction because precision is the entire point of covering a case like this responsibly. Private investigator Henry Dukes of Columbia-based Dukes Investigations and Consulting was brought into the search early, and his read on the situation, given publicly on Jesse Weber Live, lines up with what the doorbell footage shows. Dukes said there was something going on with Elena for an extended period of time, that it wasn't something that had just started, and that it was possibly a mental health issue. Dukes also addressed the husband directly, telling reporters that he had called to report Elena missing and had been distraught about her whereabouts throughout the search. Dukes Investigations and Consulting offered a $1,500 reward for information leading to Elena's whereabouts, a detail that tells you how seriously this case was being treated even before law enforcement scaled up its own response. If documented, on-camera behavior like this is the kind of evidence you want in your true crime coverage, instead of speculation dressed up as fact, this is the channel for it. Subscribe now, because what the cameras caught next is what actually moved this investigation forward. Now, back to the night itself. At 9:17 inches the evening on June 11th, roughly 2.5 hours after Elena signed into the gym, a separate camera caught her again. This time, the location was a Publix parking lot at 100 Old Cherokee Road. She was still wearing the same outfit, an olive green zip-up hoodie and black athletic pants. She was on foot, moving in the direction of Old Cherokee Road. This footage mattered for a reason that goes beyond simply confirming she was alive at 9:17. Henry Dukes explained that this sighting actually widened the search area investigators were working with, and just as importantly, it confirmed a direction of travel. Before this footage surfaced, searchers were concentrated around the gym and the wooded area behind the nearby Lowe's. After it surfaced, they understood Elena had kept moving, on foot, well past that initial location, and in a specific direction. That single piece of footage reshaped where law enforcement would eventually look. It is also, as of this reporting, the last confirmed sighting of Elena Moore alive. The next day, June 12th, her husband reported her missing. But this isn't where everything changed. The day Elena Moore was reported missing, the Lexington Police Department assigned the case to Detective A. Santoro, who became the public point of contact for tips throughout the search. Anyone with information was asked to call 803-358-7271 or to email asantoro@lexsc.gov directly. Within days, Midland's Crime Stoppers was activated as well, giving the public a second channel, a toll-free number, and an online tip form to funnel information to investigators anonymously if they preferred. The first phase of the search moved fast, but it didn't move far. Between June 12th and June 14th, officers deployed a drone over the wooded area behind the Planet Fitness and the neighboring Lowe's, the same direction Elena had been seen walking the night she vanished. They also conducted a preliminary ground sweep of that same area. Both came back empty. No clothing, no possessions, no sign of her at all. That changed in scale on Monday, June 15th. Lexington Police Department brought in serious reinforcement. The Lexington County Sheriff's Department under Sheriff Jay Kuhn, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, South Carolina Highway Patrol, along with fire services and emergency medical services. Together, these agencies conducted a detailed search of the wooded areas along Kaufman Farm Lane near the original sighting location, working the terrain methodically. Police Chief Terrence Green addressed the public directly about what this search was, and just as importantly, what it wasn't. He said this was not a recovery operation. He described it instead as a precise effort to rule out locations one at a time, narrowing down where Elena could be by eliminating where she wasn't. By the end of that day, the official result was stated plainly. No trace of Miss Moore was found during the operation. In the days that followed, with no new confirmed developments, a rumor began circulating on social media claiming Elena had been found. It spread quickly through a community that was already anxious and desperate for resolution. It wasn't true. Authorities had to walk it back publicly, and for a town that had spent days holding its breath, that false alarm added confusion on top of grief. By this point, the case had outgrown Lexington entirely. NBC News, ABC News, USA Today, and People all picked up the story, putting Elena Katherine Moore's name in front of a national audience that had never heard of this town of 23,000 people west of Columbia, South Carolina. And with that national attention came something else. The kind of scrutiny that follows almost every missing persons case involving a spouse. Elena's husband became a focus of public speculation online, and it's worth separating exactly what people were saying from what has actually been confirmed. Online, people noted that he wasn't posting constantly about his missing wife, no flood of public pleas, no visible social media campaign. Investigators, however, have been clear about one fact that complicates that narrative entirely. He is the one who reported Elena missing in the first place on June 12th, the day after she vanished. Online, people pointed to the deleted Facebook comment describing Elena as not well, asking why he would delete something like that. Private investigator Henry Dukes told Newsweek directly that the husband had been cooperating with investigators throughout the search and described him as distraught over Elena's disappearance. Online, an unverified claim spread that a LinkedIn profile under his name listed him as a private investigator, fueling theories that he'd know how to cover his tracks. Investigators were unable to confirm that the profile even belonged to the same person. As of this reporting, that claim remains unsubstantiated, nothing more than a name and a job title on the internet that nobody has tied conclusively to this case. And the most direct fact of all, stated by police themselves, on the record, he has not been named a person of interest in this investigation. If you want true crime coverage that puts a claim next to its evidence instead of just repeating whatever's trending, that's exactly what this channel exists to do. So make sure you're subscribed before we get into how this case actually broke open. Because on the night of June 16th, going into June 17th, a resident came forward with a new tip, one that hadn't been available to investigators before. They told police they'd seen Elena Moore entering the woods near the area of Old Cherokee Road and North Lake Drive, close to Lakeside Middle School, on the night she disappeared. That tip gave investigators something they hadn't had in nearly a week, a specific witness location. At 1:30 the afternoon on June 17th, officers and fire personnel deployed to that exact area, combing the wooded terrain along Old Cherokee Road in force. At 2:48 that same afternoon, they found a body. Chief Terrence Green confirmed it at a press conference shortly after, stating that an unidentified body had been found that fit the clothing description of their missing person, the olive green zip-up hoodie, the black athletic pants Elena had been wearing since June 11th. Lexington County Coroner Margaret Fisher released an official statement shortly after. She confirmed a female body matching that clothing description had been located, but she was careful to state exactly what was and wasn't known. No positive identification had been made. No cause of death had been determined. An autopsy would be scheduled in the coming days, and she asked for patience while that process moved forward. This is also the point where South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, SLED, officially took over the death investigation. SLED is the agency South Carolina calls on for its most serious cases, the ones requiring forensic resources and investigative expertise beyond what a local department typically handles on its own. Their involvement doesn't confirm a cause of death. It confirms that this case is now being treated with the full weight of the state's investigative resources behind it. Elena's longtime friend, Mendy Miller, who had known her since she was 18, spoke to Watch Fox after the discovery. She said the timeline of events still wasn't adding up for her, pointing to the footage of Elena out in public acting strangely as something that didn't match the Elena she'd known for over 20 years. She described the community's reaction in 2 words: complete devastation. As of this reporting, the autopsy has been scheduled for Saturday, June 20th. Until that examination is complete, the official cause of death remains unknown. So here's exactly where this case stands. As of the 18th of June 2026, a body has been found matching Elena Moore's clothing description. The coroner has not yet made a positive identification. No cause of death has been determined. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division is leading the death investigation, and an autopsy has been scheduled for Saturday, June 20th. That gap between finding a body and knowing what happened to that person isn't unusual, and it isn't a sign that anyone is dragging their feet. 6 days outdoors in a South Carolina summer affects what an autopsy can determine quickly. Toxicology screening alone typically takes weeks to process properly. Medical examiners would rather take the time to get this right than rush an answer they'd have to walk back later. That's not a delay. That's the process working the way it's supposed to. From here, this case realistically goes one of 2 directions, and both are still on the table. The first is that Elena's death is connected to the crisis she was clearly experiencing in the weeks before she disappeared, the disorientation, the fear she described to a friend. A tragic outcome rooted in a mental health emergency rather than anyone else's actions. The second is that the autopsy uncovers evidence pointing to foul play, which would shift this from a death investigation into a homicide investigation entirely. Each path leads somewhere different. If this turns criminal, expect SLED to re-interview everyone close to Elena, re-examine alibis, including her husband's, regardless of his current status, and treat this as an active homicide case from that point forward. If it doesn't, this becomes a different kind of story altogether, one about a woman who showed visible, documented signs of crisis for weeks, surrounded by people who noticed, and a system that didn't intervene in time. To recap the timeline, simply, Elena Moore was last seen alive on June 11th, reported missing on June 12th, and a body matching her description was found on June 17th, with her identity and cause of death still pending confirmation. Whatever the autopsy reveals, Elena Moore was a personal trainer, a CVS employee, a bartender, a wife, and by every account, someone who showed up for the people in her life consistently for over a decade. That's worth remembering regardless of how this case is ultimately classified. We will be covering the autopsy results and any updates to this case the moment they're confirmed. So if you want to be the first to know what SLED determines, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and if this case has held your attention the way it's held ours, share it with someone who'd want the real story, not just the headlines. This has been True Crime Exposed. We'll see you in the next one.